Welcome to the Menstruality podcast, where we share inspiring conversations about the power of menstrual cycle awareness and conscious menopause. This podcast is brought to you by Red School, where we're training the menstruality leaders of the future. I'm your host, Sophie Jane Hardy, and I'll be joined often by Red School's founders, Alexandra and Sjanie, as well as an inspiring group of pioneers, activists, changemakers, and creatives to explore how you can unashamedly claim the power of the menstrual cycle to activate your unique form of leadership for yourself, your community, and the world. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being with me today. One of the things I most love about the practice of menstrual cycle awareness is how it gives me a direct line to my deep self, to what I'm here for, to what I most deeply care about. And as Alexandra and Sjanie say in Wild Power, the journey to realizing your calling or purpose is made possible by the process of initiation, which is encoded in your menstrual cycle. Initiatory change happens through the archetypal pattern of death and rebirth, which is exactly what we experience each month at menstruation. And my conversation today feels like a wild safari into the messy, day-to-day lived reality of how the menstrual cycle helps us to live our calling. And I'm chatting with a woman who knows a thing or two about archetypal patterns. Grace Winteringham is the co-founder of Patternity, a conscious creative organization dedicated to sharing the positive power of pattern with the world. Along with her co-founder, Anna Murray, she was named one of Evening Standard's 1,000 most influential people. She's also a graduate of the Red School Menstruality Leadership Program. I was on the MLP with her and Anna, so I got to spend some time in person with them. And Grace is currently immersed in a process of accelerated transformation as she navigates her own quest to follow her calling. So let's get started with how cycle awareness helps us to follow our callings with the amazing Grace Winteringham. Oh, well, Grace, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I've got so many questions for you and I can't wait to get into this chat. But before we do, let's do a cycle check-in. You just let me know that you're in the middle of your cycle. You're around ovulation, right?
That is correct. Yeah, thank you, Sophie. And yeah, so nice to be here. I'm day 14 and this is a good time for me generally, feeling very like full of energy and positive and just out in the world. But it was the full moon last night and I had so many crazy dreams that I feel exhausted. I don't think I didn't sleep. I think I just did multiple adventures. So I need to kind of unpick them a little bit. But anyway, that's maybe for another podcast.
Part two. Great.
Exactly.
I'm on day 6 here and I've got a very untamed feeling. So it's like I've been a horse in a paddock in a field and I've jumped the ropes or the fence and I'm just running through the landscape. But
Brilliant.
I'm young and I don't know where I'm going. So it feels like exhilarating and dangerous at the same
I
time.
love that. I love that.
So I've come out of my bleed. There's a lot of rising energy now as I come into the pre-ovulation inner spring phase, and I just need some containment. So I've got to bear that in mind today. Like, contain the energy, don't let it like splurge, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I met on the Menstruality Leadership Program, and I think that was like 2017 or 2018, something like that.
2018, yeah.
2018. So the first thing I'm curious to ask about is what called you to that program? What made you say, yes, I have to be there?
My journey into sort of menstrual awareness has been kind of a rocky one in the sense that I really struggled with moods. I mean, the kind of term that we're familiar with is PMT. And I suppose from doing the work with Red School, I kind of understand that it's not as simple as that. It's not necessarily just a label that one attaches. But then I'm very aware I'm very aware of those sort of behaviors, if you will, almost like the moods of those really intense fluctuations that I used to experience around, well, just every month of my cycle. And I'd also, without going into too much detail, it was something I really recognized in my mum. And it was something she really struggled with. But women then, because of the lack of knowledge then, in terms of like holding down jobs, running families, just being on all the time. And, she's a baby boomer. So it's like of that very, patriarchal kind of way of women really wanting to sort of find their place in the world, but just not really being acknowledged for just what they're experiencing. So I was always quite scared of the cycle, but I suppose I wouldn't have ever called it that then. It was very much just like my mum having quite challenging times, and then a period of almost like apology and just saying, oh, I'm really premenstrual, and I mirrored that pattern pretty much, I would say. And it was actually an ex-boyfriend who kind of helped me to see, because I couldn't really see it when I was in it, even though I was aware of what happened with my mum. Yeah, I just, I felt quite isolated in the sense of I didn't really sense many friends having a similar situation. And yeah, through the kind of guidance of a partner, just sort of saying, look, I think this might be something you need to look into. It sort of took me on this journey, and I went down a medical route initially. That was sort of what was most accessible at that time, just sort of from a basic internet search. And then that led me on to finding the Red School. I don't really remember how, but I ended up attending like a weekend workshop in Brighton, which would have been maybe like the year before. And I was just like, wow, this is speaking a whole other language that just feels so real and needed. And it's been a long journey in terms of coming to that place, and one that has been slow. It's almost like every cycle almost just going, oh, and here I am again. Oh, and now I need to look at this again. And I think the MLP was then, with you and with, I mean, it was an amazing group of people. I just found the whole thing just, I mean, it was life-changing, truly.
Before we get into how it changed things for you, I'd just love it if we can, if you're willing, to look at what was happening for you in those PMT weeks,
Mm.
just to pull it out of the shadows. I know that on the podcast, I've shared a lot of my experiences of what my inner autumn premenstrual rage and anxiety and depression looked like. So would you mind sharing a bit about what it looked like and the impact that it had?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. It's a little bit hazy now. It's a bit like a dream in the way where you sort of try to grab hold of something. You kind of really grab hold of the feeling, but it's so real in the moment. And I definitely had, I would say, like rage, like real rage, to the point where I was just so angry with myself, but mostly it would be projected onto others. And then with that real anger, like I was never physically violent with someone, but I could feel that was very possible, like in my being. I mean, there were times, honestly, Sophie, when I felt suicidal. It was just complete like desperation and despair, but just what's the point? That was kind of underpinning it, and just feeling like you're caught in a vicious cycle as opposed to a supportive cycle, or a cycle that's going to change. You're just sort of stuck there. And it was often about the other. If I was on my own, it was almost like I could just be in those spaces of anger and frustration just on my own, and it didn't really matter, but it was incredibly impactful to the people that were in my life. And that, I think, was probably the catalyst for the change, because that's just not acceptable. But I really wanted to understand why that was happening.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for naming that. I know so many people have felt that way and still feel that way. And we've had several conversations on the podcast about PMDD and about the severe premenstrual rage that can happen. I know that place personally.
Mm.
Big questions, Grace, for like 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, but I can feel how a lot of that rage was that I was sitting outside of my own truth of myself and my experience. And there was something about that, the rage and the depression that forced me to look at who I am, what I'm about, and what I want, what I'm here to do. And I'm just curious if that process was at work there for you, since we're having a conversation here about callings.
Mm. Yeah, I think at that time it wasn't as black and white as that for me. I think at that time I was running a business with a friend, with Anna, a company called Patternity, and I think I was working incredibly hard,
Yeah.
but I was also 20, I was in my like mid 20s. I was partying a lot. Like we would go to events and we were quite sociable and, like meeting people. And, 1 minute we were doing installations and then the next minute we'd be like doing photo shoots and then giving talks. And so it was a really intense period of time that I was overworked, like we were overworked. And that's something that I've been able to reflect on a lot since. But I think maybe because I was oblivious to the sort of fundamental rhythms and seasons and patterns that were kind of existing within me, I was kind of trying to override them. And then the kind of fallout of that was then very intense PMT.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was at the time with regards to a calling, I was living out a sort of an ambition, I suppose. I came out of uni and didn't really work for anyone else. I just sort of went straight into setting up a business.
Wow.
So that felt like a calling in a way, because it was like I'm just following something really instinctual
Hmm.
almost. But yes, since then, having had more time to kind of go deeper and reflect and be like, okay, so what is it? Is the calling? Yeah, that's come a bit later. But I think that is partly also to do with just age as well, just getting a bit older. Because at that time, you're just like having fun and
Yeah, yeah.
wanting to do everything.
The things we do in our 20s.
I know.
I guess what I'm hearing, maybe the common theme for both of us is our inner autumn premenstrual window was showing us what was out of whack in our lives, what was out of balance. And
Definitely.
it was coming out in an ugly, difficult, challenging, kind of quite aggressive way for both of us that made us pay attention.
Yeah.
The inner autumn makes us pay attention, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I don't know how this is for you, Sophie, but I can honestly say that the place of the cycle within autumn used to be so hard for me, and now it's my favorite part.
Same. Yeah. It's like, I'm trying to tell you something. You're not listening, so I'm going to scream it really loud. And then when we
Yeah,
listen, changes happen. And yeah, same. It's my home now of the
yeah.
cycle. Yeah, yeah. So thank you. I really appreciate that. So back to the MLP. We're sitting at Hawkwood back when Alexandra and Sjanie used to do this in person. And you're there with Anna, who you were
Yes.
running paternity with. And one of the things you said, which I love, and we've, quoted quite a lot at Red School, is like that you experienced the Menstruality Leadership Program as nothing short of a miracle, and also that it's like this feminine instruction manual for life.
Mm,
I would love to hear a bit more about like how game changing it was for you
mm.
to be immersed in this cyclical wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much as well because since doing the MLP, I've actually done it a second time, and I've also done the Creative Power workshop and done your cyclical or doing your cyclical business with you, and so I have had these multiple touch points with Red School and the philosophies and things. So it's hard to it's hard to really remember that, like what that really felt like then, but it was. Yeah, I think there was just I suppose what I've realized it was just an alternative way of seeing and being. And that was one of our sort of paternity bylines, was a way of seeing, a way of being. And so there was just something so yeah, kind of profound within that, which Alexandra and Sjanie were offering us. And at a very simple level, I mean, coming into community with a group of women for, I mean, I think each chunk of time was what, like 5 days, wasn't it? But it was over the course of a couple of months, so sort of two chunks of time. To be able to go on that like deep dive in almost like a red tent setting, which is not something I've ever really done before, and to really to be able to like honor your own uniqueness as an individual, but held in a community or a group of women who were all experiencing something very unique, but completely aligned and shared, was like, I guess it gives one a true sense of belonging. That's how it felt for me. And doing it with Anna was also then a deeper layer to that, because obviously we'd run this business together, and we were a partnership, a professional partnership, but it allowed us to kind of meet each other on another level, I think. And so it gave us a language really to understand a lot of our challenges, but also a lot of our inspirations and aspirations.
It's so great to hear. The word belonging really stands out for
Mm.
me. And that's what I see now, because in a way, the MLP's become even more immersive now because it's 3 months intensely together. And the word belonging comes up again and again for the women and people that join. And it was my experience too of being immersed in a kind of a space that felt ancient and timeless
Mm.
with other women, other people who bleed, and leaning into the brilliance of the wisdom inside us and having
Mm.
full permission to go all the way in a world that frankly doesn't care about our menstrual cycles and would much rather we just didn't talk about them ever. I can always remember I had a boss who said that her husband had been looking in her handbag for something and had pulled out a tampon in a packet unused and had thrown it across the room in disgust. Like, I really feel like that story displays where we're at collectively still around periods.
Yeah.
The way that you and Anna hold pattern as central
Mm.
in our lives, and the way the ideas you have around it and the way it shapes how you see the world. I'm curious how it was to kind of land yourselves in spirals and cycles in this way. Like, was this like next level, like the patterns in the world are inside our bodies? Like, was that happening for you? Did you know that already?
So when we started Patternity, it was a big exploration into the patterns that exist in all life. So it was like the web of life. So we knew that that was patterns that were within us and patterns outside of us. So it was kind of a way of like categorizing almost by pattern. But I don't think at that point we were going in. We've sort of talked about this idea of like Anna and I, this is about this patterns that are sort of up and out and patterns that are kind of down and in. And I
Mm.
suppose there's that sort of external expression of patterns. So maybe how we were applying it to products or installations, or we had I mean, this was like pre-Instagram. We had this very visual blog of categorizing patterns. So we would have the spiral of a galaxy next to the spiral of water going down a plug hole, next to the spiral of the way the hair comes out on an animal's skin, or so like drawing these comparisons through pattern. And it's kind of good when you've got the visual because it's so literal. Whereas this going in part now, the patterns that exist within us is almost harder to illustrate in the sense that it can only really be experienced. Red School are pioneers in that regard. It's very exciting in terms of like that could be this next chapter, this going in, these exploring these deep patterns that exist within us and that unite us so that it's available to everyone. And I think that's this big challenge that I'm getting quite excited about getting my teeth into next, a sort of a phase two.
Yeah, and thinking about your calling now,
Yeah.
I know this is all so challenging to talk about. It's so emergent, it's intangible. Like the calling isn't like a thing that we can claim and state, and it is that forever. Like it's always changing. I feel like it's like a scent and I'm on the trail of it, but I never quite see it. It's like the tail of a wild animal that it keeps disappearing around a corner and I just keep following it wherever it's gone.
Like that horse you're riding today, Sophie.
Yes, like that, the day 6 horse I'm galloping on. Where am I? Yeah. because we're all in this together, and by we, I mean all the people listening to this
Yeah,
podcast too, we're all going, what am I about? What am I here for? How can I serve? How can I be of service?
yeah.
Yeah, how is that looking for you these days?
I just do not know, Sophie. I find it's very changeable for me for a start. I would probably say like in the last 6 months, I've maybe had more clarity in terms of a more of an of a instinct that it's like something's emerging. But as you say, and as I totally agree with, it's no one thing. It's not like a job in inverted commas. I see it more as a sort of a state of being. And I guess if I sort of look at that through like a cyclical lens, there are ebbs and flows, there are sort of highs and lows, there are moments of light, moments of dark. And so it is this kind of mutable thing. But linking back to what I was just saying about this idea of exploring the world through an up and out lens versus a sort of a down and in lens, it's hard because I'm sort of cautious to say this in the sense of it. I don't want to become so down and in that you almost become completely isolated from reality. But there is so much noise out there always, there's just so much vying for our attention. And I think to just come back to the simplicity of, yeah, the rhythms and the patterns and the cycles that kind of exist within us, that to me is the calling. It's like getting into alignment with that is my calling because it's almost like the calling of just being human.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that's probably, I mean, this is what I'm feeling, whether I'm actioning it yet.
By the time we're 80 in our rocking chairs, we'll have nailed this being. Because I feel like what you're pointing to, let me know if I'm getting this right, is oh, it's almost like we're just here to be ourselves.
Yeah, yeah,
This culture that we live in, the legacy of colonization,
yeah,
capitalist structure, the patriarchy on our heels, like driving us through ambition to create and produce and be bigger and better and faster. And I guess what I'm sensing and hearing is this call down and in is about being.
yeah, absolutely. And just moving more in alignment with the pace of the earth. And, it can't be on all the time. It's not a linear, just more, up, up, up. It just can't. And we've all heard all the, well, I was going to say all the stories, but they're not stories. I mean, it's a very scary reality that we're kind of nearing complete collapse, if not already kind of there, so it's just how can we make sure we don't collapse in ourselves, because that's like the only thing you can really affect change of, I guess, is yourself.
Yeah, it's a hard truth
Mm.
I'm home to, but that, yeah, we only really have agency over our own reactions and responses and decisions. And cycle awareness, for me, I'm curious about for you, it keeps me in touch with myself so that hopefully I'm responding rather than reacting more.
Definitely, and I think that almost comes full cycle in terms of circle cycle, just how what we were maybe experiencing with that idea of the rage piece around, the inner autumn phase of the cycle, and just where how that's sort of is still there, but it's shifting into something that it's constructive as opposed to destructive. And how can we use that rage, or how can I use that kind of like it's sort of enraged passion, if you will, to just not go against the system. That sounds a bit extreme, but it's like there is another way. There is another way. And I think cycle awareness it's definitely taught me that, but it's really helping me to see that, and it's something I'd like to help others to see as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel very aligned with you in this. And I'm finding my mind, my crazy, wild day 6 mind traveling to the work that you've been doing recently with
Dr. Rocio Rosales Meza. Yeah.
there are ways of knowing that have existed for a long time on our
Yeah.
planet that totally embrace what you're saying,
Yeah.
in all corners of the world. And there have been structures and forces that have uprooted us from
Yeah.
those knowings. Yeah, could you share a bit about what that decolonizing work, how that has contributed to this process?
Yeah, I mean, the first course I did was called Decolonial Shadow Work, and it's called Unlearning the White Colonial Mind. So quite sort of intense, really, in terms of it was not something I was taking lightly, but I was really aware that I guess where she's coming from is one of a more indigenous way of being. So she's part of the Quera Inca lineage, and not to co-opt what she's sharing and teaching, but I guess what she's been trying to help us see is that we've kind of been just conditioned into a way of being, and it's not considerate of indigenous ways, ancient ways, pre-colonial ways. It's not really honoring earth, it's not honoring cycles, it's not honoring seasons. So that has been a journey to first unpick and kind of unlearn, and then bring in, and how can we make offerings and be in right relationship. And she encourages you to kind of connect with your own ancestry and what might be true for you and your lineage. And as a white British woman, I'm a bit like, well, I don't really know what that is. So then I was like, okay, so what is it for me? And then it was just this sudden realization that the cycle can offer that. Like my own menstrual cycle can be my anchor point. So if it's about a cyclical lineage, suddenly that kind of opened up this work and understanding her teachings, or working with her teachings, in less of a sort of feeling of guilt and shame around what the colonization has done, and more of a way of like, okay, so what can we do now, living in right relationship? How can we act and become part of this global community that is honoring of nature and source, And then I'm doing another course with her, slightly lighter touch, if you will, with Anna as well, and that's called Divine Alignment. And again, I just feel like it's such important work to just keep coming back to this simplicity of this practice, and that for me is menstrual cycle awareness. And cycle awareness for anyone who doesn't menstruate or isn't menstruating, so working with cycles like the moon, or just seasonal cycles, or like mood cycles, whatever it might be. There are cycles within cycles, and we're all experiencing them if we pay attention.
I'm going to pause the conversation with Grace just for a moment to share a personal message from Alexandra and Sjanie. So this is from the website for the Menstruality Leadership Program. And they say, as we write this, dreaming into the circle that will gather for this journey, we're deeply moved to feel the smorgasbord of possibilities available to you. Our deep hope for you, if you feel called to take your seat in this circle, is that you have a direct, illuminating, life-changing experience. An experience of being initiated into the way of the feminine, an experience of the potent, personalized medicine of the menstrual cycle, and an experience of your own growing sense of personal power, what you're made of and capable of, so that you can be unleashed to more fully serve your calling and be a force for change in the world. The Menstruality Leadership Program begins in February. There's a special early bird offer that ends on Thursday the 3rd of October, where you can save £390, and you can find out all about the program, explore the curriculum, hear testimonials from previous graduates at menstrualityleadership.com. That's menstrualityleadership.com. Okay, let's get back to the conversation with Grace. What I'm loving about listening to you and having this conversation is that we're really inside the nuances and the paradoxes and the um, just the unknownness of
Mm.
people who want to follow the truth that's happening inside us and listen to it and live from it. It's not as simple. And I think there's a lot of tropes out there in the world. And what is your calling? And how can you live it and lead in the world? And what it really looks like is this very intimate, personal, often like personally for me, fumbling feeling of okay, I'm out of alignment. How do I get back in alignment? Okay, I'm more in alignment now. I'm receiving some new information. Oh, it's changing how I'm seeing things. Oh, this value is more important now. Like just we're we're tracking together, and I'm loving the aliveness of this. Like we don't have to make sense. We don't have to make sense right now. We have to
Yeah,
just be true to what we're experiencing.
absolutely, Sophie. And I'm really grateful for you for just even naming that, because again, part of this colonial conditioning is perfection. And perfectionism is kind of like the cycle's worst enemy, really, isn't it? I mean, just and we're all so caught in it all the time, you
Mhm,
know.
mhm.
Yeah, everything you shared there is just it's so right. And it's so bloody hard to remember.
Yeah.
Just to be in the space of not knowing the via negativa.
Yes, yes. The second half of the cycle that dissolves our egos and turns us into mush so that we can be reborn again. Yeah. And the cycle is such a trickster too. Like when we're talking about leadership, as in the definition of leadership being how close am I to my truest expression of myself and how much am I sharing that with the world uh, and helping others to do the same. Maybe like I'm just use that as my definition of leadership right now. The cycle keeps changing. It keeps
Mm,
throwing us into new strange experiences. Like I've been oscillating between 24-day cycles and 30-day cycles.
mm,
So that's been keeping me on my toes.
mm,
Like, am I in an autumn now? Am I not? And then when we look to the bigger cycles of, say, like the cycles I've been through recently, cycles of infertility, cycles of pregnancy, cycles of breastfeeding, cycles of illness, cycles of creativity. They are, where am I going with this, Grace?
Well, I think you're just going with the fact that it's this sort of like infinitely just ever emerging, ever evolving wonder.
Yes.
Just as you were talking there, I was thinking from a leadership perspective. Sorry to finish your sentence here,
I
Sophie. Was there...
wanted you to. I wanted you to.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's funny that even happened because it is a bit of this sort of like passing the baton or like, passing the torch. It's almost like when we just get to that point of, okay, I am done now. I need to stop. It's like, don't worry, like I've got you. And I think that's, yeah, not only does we obviously can all do that for each other, but that is something that the cycle does. And I think from a leadership perspective, this was something I shared actually halfway through doing the second MLP, so the sort of prerequisite to doing the apprenticeship. I just completed the MLP in 2023, and I don't remember what phase this was in, but this was in one of the kind of modules. I think probably as I was like coming into my inner spring, maybe, which is a time that I find quite challenging. I'm very at home in the sort of via negativa side part of the cycle, but as I guess the via positiva is more like, right, now I need to do something with this. Now I need to be a leader. But I think the kind of realization was that like no matter what one does, so whether you're interested in horse therapy or um, branding or I'm just landscape gardening, these are all things I've tried recently in a bid to find my calling. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. Yeah, the sort of cycle is the consistent part that is what's creating the sort of tone of leadership within any of those fields. And so, like this is why I love the sort of community and circle on the circle platform that Red School obviously it's kind of hosted on, you just can really see all these different interests. There's like a volcanologist and a philosopher and then there's like yoga and nutrition, but it's almost like the leadership part is not about like what you're doing, it's like how you're doing it.
Yeah, our calling is who we are.
Yeah.
One of my teachers that I've studied with for a long time, Shamali from the Awakening Women Institute, it's like
Mhm.
she calls it the river of us,
Yeah,
which I love
nice.
because it's rivers are constantly changing and being renewed and but they're always there. So they're kind of there and not there at the same time.
Yeah.
The calling, yeah, is the river of us, and it moves through different iterations, different seasons of life, like you say, horse therapy, which I totally would also love to have another podcast conversation with you about. But for me, it's looked like yeah, yoga teaching, filmmaking, being a
Mm.
communications director at a nonprofit, hosting this podcast, creating your cyclical business. And they're quite different, but the thread is who I am, the values that I hold, and what I love the most.
Yeah,
Taking a stand for what I love, which I feel like is what we're talking about, really.
definitely. And fair play to you, Sophie. I mean, you're absolutely like bossing it.
I don't agree, but thank you. I feel like I'm fumbling with all of us. But yeah, I feel the same about you. When I look at what you and Anna did, and maybe we'll continue to do at Patternity. I mean, there's beautiful things going on in this community, right?
Yeah,
Your
yeah,
community. It's a very exciting place to be.
definitely. Yeah, it's great to be part of that. And it's refreshing to come to something where there isn't a feeling of competitiveness. And I think that's a massive thing between women, especially. And, something that Anna and I were always really aware of in our design community. We were at a time in London with, everything was like really just like popping off visually because it was like the sort of beginning of Instagram. And there was a couple of like friends who have design companies. And there was just never any competitiveness. It was always this really supportive, almost like sisterhood, for want of a better phrase, in what was a predominantly male-oriented like industry, really. And there's just something so beautiful for that I mean, it's very much within Red School and the Hive and Circle and all these different sort of communities, but just within the movement, it's just removing that competitiveness and wanting, yeah, everyone's coming at it from a place of genuine support and care. And I think like we've been missing that care piece for so long. And I think this is what's bringing it, we're going to be kind of bringing that back. Yeah, the cycle's like allowing us to do that.
Yeah, the cycle allows, or when we pay attention to the cycle, it allows us to take care of our own needs. Well, we have more capacity to have a relational experience with the rest of life.
Yeah,
Can I just name something?
go on.
I had an inner spring experience then because you said that I'm bossing it. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, no, 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 no. And I just want to just name like my inner spring vulnerability was present there. And I just want to receive that. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
saying that I'm bossing it.
you definitely are.
How quickly do we jump in to say, no, 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 I'm not good?
I mean, it's a never-ending work, though, isn't it, Sophie? I mean,
Yes.
and it's constantly changing. Even beyond the cycle, it's not just by the week or by the month. It's just like every minute. Sometimes I'm like 1 minute, but this morning I was like doing this podcast. I was like, yes, this is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to this. The next minute I was like, oh my God, what am I going to say? Like, oh, that is just life.
Oh, thank you for normalizing that. Thank you. And to bring cycle awareness in, it's like probably the main teaching that I've got from cycle awareness, which is actually probably the main teaching that I received from years of being in the world of Buddhism and yoga, which is
Mm.
things change.
Yeah. The only constant is change.
Yeah. I'm in a big moment in my life right now where there's a lot going on. We're about to launch your cyclical business again. And I keep just breathing and going, Sophie, you're gonna be fine because
Yeah.
this is just I'm surfing a big wave right now. And at some point, the wave's going to possibly cough me out, like coughing and spluttering on the beach, or maybe I'll gracefully slide into the beach, who knows? But I'll be on the beach and I'll be able to rest again.
Yeah.
And that's really vital, actually, when we're on this quest of listening and following for the calling, right? We need to fully embrace the ebb and flow of it. And I wanted to ask you about this, like, because I feel like you've been in more of an ebb recently.
That an ebb, that's the down bit. Yeah.
Yes, when less is happening on the outside.
Oh yeah, I've been ebbing for a good few years now.
Yeah. And how has the cycle held you in that, like in your moments of doubt or
I mean, it definitely has. It definitely has. I guess with the menstrual cycle, that's the foundational piece for me. But as I was kind of just saying, there's like so many other cycles going on. Such a hard question to answer because when I'm in it, again, it's almost like the PMT thing I was kind of referring to. It's like I can't ever see it when I'm in it. It's only once then you're maybe out of the other side and you've stepped into almost what would be like the polarity of that thing, to be able to see and get the perspective of what was happening or like how I've changed. Yeah, maybe could you just ask the question again?
in a different way? Yeah, 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 definitely. I think one of the hardest things in life, and I've just been through one of these things myself, is when we don't feel like we're in touch with this calling or we feel like we've lost sight of it. So, in the couple of years after Artie was born, I had some really dark nights, like literally in the middle of the night, going, "What the fuck am I about?" Like, I can't remember who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing here. I've had such moments in my life where like we were planting a million trees at Tree Sisters. That's what I'm for. It's so clear. And here I was breastfeeding, exhausted, just smashed on the rocks by early mothering, feeling like I just didn't know who I was, like in a real ebb.
Yeah,
And knowing that it was going to change helped me. Cycle awareness helped me in that way. But I'm also aware that I don't know how it's been for you, but that you've been in more of an ebb over the
yeah,
past while. And I'm curious how your cycle awareness practice has supported and held you while you've been in your own experience of
yeah.
ebb.
Yeah, so I guess the ebb started for me when I took a step back from paternity. So that would have been around sort of 2021. I actually moved from London to Glasgow a couple of years before that, having really just felt completely burnt out. And I know it was the same for Anna as well. We'd been doing the business for sort of 12 years by that point, just exhausted, and just on someone else's time frame mostly because we were working a lot with brands and, other sort of design companies. So that was a sort of a quite a slow but very quite painful, like almost untethering, like going into that like ebb phase.
Yes.
I don't know if I could just say, 'cause it definitely wasn't like flow, flow, flow all the way up to that point, but it was almost like flow and then just really intense, like water rapids and mad waterfall crashing off an edge. But then to go into that ebb phase was almost just one of really going in. And when I first started that process, I'm still not by no means a master of this whatsoever, but learning to go into that place of uncertainty and not knowing, and almost realizing, I think what a big change for me was like understanding the difference between almost like my work and my job.
Mm,
So one was sort of my work was this deep desire for like meaning, finding a calling, wanting to like really be able to live as authentically as possible, live by my own code. And then my job was like how I'm going to pay the bills.
yes.
And I think when I started working for other people, I've worked with friends and doing similar things to what I was doing within paternity, but it didn't take from me creatively in the same way. that it had done with paternity, which I think had led on to this almost like this, as I'm calling it, burnout. But it's a complex thing. It's like I don't really know what it was. And it was maybe just, again, it was maybe the ending of a cycle
Yeah.
prior to getting a new one. Just I've been in an extended crossover phase almost.
Yes.
So yeah, I think going from paternity to then working for other people to then starting to feel like, okay, I want to do my own thing again, but it can't be for brands and for other people. It's got to be something that's got much deeper meaning. And so really exploring that through my cycle each month. So like really going in, and I remember doing a lot of walking. Like I really would just walk. I can be a bit of an overthinker, so that would be really helpful to just kind of like move things through, I guess, bring a bit of flow to the ebb.
Yeah.
um, and the cycle really helps with that. A greater sort of the greater cycles too, in terms of seasonally. Like I just really took time off in the winter and just tried to do a lot less. Um, and I think in the last 6 months something shifted where I've almost made a commitment to want to. It's not so much that I want to become solely like a menstrual educator, but it's that I really appreciate the value of cyclical kind of consciousness, cyclical awareness. And so now I'm just starting to sort of reweave that together again. So in terms of how I can best be of service and how I can support others, but also how can I bring in 13, well, 10, yeah, 12, 13 years of my life with paternity, which was all about pattern, looking at pattern in that deeper way, with that deeper lens. So yeah, the cycle's been supporting me through that whole process because I'm just starting to how I'm trying to think how I'd sort of describe it. It's like the fundamental pattern.
Yes.
So if I'm sort of, that's my anchor point, and then from there it's like I can build on that. But just to kind of come back specifically to some of the teachings of Red School, with things like the dark arts and just the sort of self-care practices of each of the inner seasons, they have been so supportive in this journey, in this process. And also, like, I'd really would like to name my friend Claire Francis Chapman. She's been incredibly supportive in this process, as has Anna, as has like conversations with you, Sophie. So it's this coming together of like these um different energies, and just being free to flow with that and seeing what emerges, loosening the grip.
Yes.
Like that was something that was so intense with me and Anna within paternity, and it's probably why the company was so successful. But we had such a sort of tight grip on things, like we were seriously going for it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's not sustainable. Yeah,
No.
it's a very long answer.
Oh, that's beautiful. My mind's going off in so many different directions, but talking about the grip that we hold, like I'm thinking of the big corporation that my husband works for and how tightly everyone's holding and how dehumanizing it is. And then that Leonard Cohen quote, you lose your grip and you slip into the masterpiece.
Nice.
That's what we're talking about here.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
It sounds like a theme of our conversation is cycle awareness innately brings us into community with each other, where we
Yeah.
can't hold on so tight because we're in relationship with others, they're ebbing and flowing, we're adjusting to them, and so much more can emerge from that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's such a nice way of putting it, Sophie, and much more succinct. Yeah. But I do, in response to your quote, I do have to share, like I used to have this on my sign off on my paternity email, and it's an African proverb, and it's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I do feel like that is, this next phase. It's like interdependence. You have to know yourself, be in yourself, be in right relationship to yourself, but it has to be with the other and with nature and with the greater web of life. And I know, I deeply know that the cycle allows us to do that.
Oh, so beautifully said. Well, I'm watching this space avidly to see what emerges through you over these coming years, and like particularly what emerges for you over these 2 years of the menstruality apprenticeship, which for those listening who haven't heard of this yet, Alexandra and Sjanie have just created a new program for the graduates of the Menstruality Leadership Program to apprentice with them for 2 years, going really more deeply into these feminine leadership skills, the dark arts that you mentioned earlier, the leadership skills that emerge from the practice of cycle awareness and
Mhm.
from menstruality. So yeah, just in our last couple of minutes, what are you most excited for in that apprenticeship process?
So, I mean, I'm really excited just for the whole piece because for me, it's a real like stepping in. It's like I've finally, I haven't studied since my textiles degree in like 2008, unofficially. So, yeah, that feels really exciting to go on this deep dive within a space that I would say they've self stated is very emergent, so it's going to be an exploration into what feels like pretty pioneering, this sort of menstruality as a profession, and also the legacy of Red School. So that's super exciting for me because I am really interested in that approach, yeah, that kind of pioneering approach.
And just to
um
name it, because the fact is Alexandra is 70, 71
yeah,
now. So
yeah,
she's
yeah,
looking to pass the torch on. Yeah, and that's a big
exactly.
part of what this is about. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think for me, something that's been so supportive over the many years of like connecting with the cycle awareness work is the menstruality medicine circles that I guess it would have been Alexandra and Sjanie that developed that process. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Sophie. And I've really experienced the value of that, but I also would really love to be able to offer that. And it's that going in, that down and in of inner visions, and I suppose just like intuition and like trusting what is coming from inside of us. And it links with like dreams. And yeah, I'm really excited about learning how to like facilitate that. And yeah, I mean there's loads of things, but that specifically because it's been so supportive for me. And I've actually got a session with Abby this afternoon to do one. So
Yay. So that's Abby Denyer-Buick, who's one of the
yes.
mentors on the Mentality Leadership Program. Yeah, she's so great. Yeah, same. The things that come up in those menstruality medicine circle, like inner journeys, are profound and sort of coming back full circle to your full moon dreams from last night. It's like dream
Exactly.
time has so much wisdom for us, doesn't it?
It truly does. And I think again, this has been something that I've learned from Dr. Rocio as well, is that whether we want to call it spirit or dreams or like the unknown or intuition, whatever it is, there is this other dimension that exists. And I think we're only just starting to really honor and acknowledge that as useful information. It's important information. And again, like bring it back to the cycle and the menstrual medicine circles, it's like it's just helping to yeah, like what's the word? Like just put a stake in the ground with that. It's like the witch wound is like finally being healed.
Totally. We could clearly talk for 10
Oh,
hours.
we could.
we must somehow wrap this up. But I keep talking about other podcast people who have heard this a few times if they listen that like this is such a big thing to say, but maybe, we're moving from Descartes, I think, therefore I am, to more of what Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Monologues, I feel, therefore I am. Maybe we're inside a huge philosophical movement that people in like 300 years' time will look back and go, this is what cycle awareness was a huge part of ushering in this.
Yeah, well, I believe that for sure. Yeah.
If we make it. So let's all keep tracking our cycles and creating, a more sustainable world.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Grace. It's been so great to chat with you.
Such a pleasure, Sophie.
Maybe we can have a part 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 down the line.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I'm really excited for getting started with the apprenticeship.
You're welcome. Bye, love.
Thanks, Sophie. Lots of love. Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being here all the way through to the end of this podcast. I would really appreciate it if you would head over to Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast and leave us a review and rate the podcast. It really goes a long way to getting this podcast out to more people, particularly if you can leave a review on Apple. Thank you so much. I love being part of this conversation with you, part of this community gathered around this work. If there's anyone that you'd love us to interview, if there are any topics you'd love us to explore, you can always email me at sophie@redschool.net. And that's it for this week. I'll be with you again next week. And until then, keep living life according to your own brilliant rhythm.